Welcome to the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. I'm your host, registered dietitian and kidney stone expert, Melanie. After learning a ton about kidney stones and helping people prevent stones at the University of Chicago, I was fed up with all the terrible advice people were finding online. So I decided to do something about it. The Kidney Dietitian was born. This podcast is for people who want to learn what actually works to prevent kidney stones and still enjoy life, eating, and their favorite foods. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the 81st episode of the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. As always, I'm your host, registered dietitian and kidney stone expert, Melanie. And today we have a slightly different episode. I just got back from the 2025 R.O.C.K Society meeting, and I'll talk a little bit more later about what that actually means. But I just got back from a meeting yesterday as I'm recording this episode on Monday, February 3rd. And I just was really, really excited about everything that I learned that's going on in the area of kidney stone research right now, and I thought that my listeners might be interested in it as well. So this is kind of a massive overview of all of the different types of topics that were covered at this R.O.C.K Society meeting. So before I dive into that, I wanted to share a little bit about what R.O.C.K is. So R.O.C.K, R-O.C.K, stands for Research on Calculus Kinetics, and it is a relatively small group of kidney stone researchers because the kidney stone community, aka doctors and a few dietitians, there's 2 dietitians, including myself, that attend R.O.C.K, that are really, really interested in kidney stone prevention and really furthering the research and care for kidney stone patients is surprisingly small. So I'm really bad at estimating people, but I'm estimating that there was maybe 150 to 200 people at this meeting, which is pretty far for the course. It's a really, really small meeting, and it's the only kidney stone specific meeting that I'm aware of that happens annually. Certainly there's, the American Society of Nephrology, as well as the National Kidney Foundation, which are kidney specific meetings, but those by and large focus on kidney disease. There's really not many meetings that focus just on kidney stones. And so it's really, really exciting to be with a group of people who are specifically interested in kidney stones because, as you know, there's really not a lot of us out there. And so R.O.C.K is a little bit different than most meetings that I've been to in that it really is very, it's meant to kind of stimulate conversations around this group of people. And I feel like they can do this because it is so small, right? So really kind of sparking conversation and thought and innovation among this relatively small group of kidney stone researchers. And as R.O.C.K, the name implies, Research on Calculus Kinetics, it really is focused on researching exactly what's going on to prevent stones, or what's going on that's causing stones, therefore, what we can do to prevent them. So this meeting this year was wonderful. It was in Milwaukee, which was very close for me. It's just an hour and a half drive or so from Chicago, where I live. And this meeting in particular really got back to kind of some basic science ideas and really kind of looking at what we can do to really prevent stones from a very, very mechanistic, very, very sciencey lens, if that makes sense. So, for example, there was a lot of talks about trying to better understand all of the different receptors and transporters that are in the kidney and how those things can be impacted by different things to help us get, for example, more citrate in the urine, or perhaps get less calcium in the urine, or perhaps get a better acid-base balance, right? So we need to understand exactly what's going on physiologically in the kidney that is making all of this happen so we can better come up with strategies to make things better, basically from a stone prevention standpoint. So a lot of research like that. Also a few topics about developing different animal models. So looking at flies, for example, and dogs and wolves and ferrets, actually, and pigs. And so kind of looking at all of these different animals and sort of looking at how they are different than humans when it comes to kidney stone prevention and kidney health, and how they're the same, and really understanding those differences is really, really critical for any future work that is going on with those animals to help us understand what we can learn from them, if that makes sense, right? So A lot of really interesting research going on there. Of course, looking at exactly how medications work and how we might use medications that are available now differently to help prevent stones in some people. There was also a really, really interesting talk from a plant microbiologist, actually, who is developing a beet that is lower in oxalate than most beets, because beets are, one of those notorious high oxalate foods. So he's working on developing a beet that is lower in oxalate, and so kind of understanding what he did to do that. So that was really, really interesting. Most of the talks were really the sort of basic science research. There was a lot of other talks that might be a little bit more applicable to listeners. One of them that I think is fascinating is about how socioeconomic status impacts stone risk. And in general, we see that people who live in more disadvantaged neighborhoods, people who have less money, people who are not white, people who have less economic opportunity, essentially, tend to have a higher risk of stones. And so it's really, really important to understand why that is and what's going on as we come up with strategies as a field to help prevent stones overall. Certainly a lot of topics on stone surgery specifically. So, the types of lasers and the damage potentially that the heat from the laser is causing and how important is that. So lots of very surgery specific talks that was always really interesting as well. There was one fascinating talk from Dr. Goldfarb about global warming and kidney stones, and he has done a ton of work looking at the history of stones and how the earth is warming, and basically making projections for how kidney stones will increase as global warming continues to happen, essentially, and the fact that global warming has likely contributed somewhat to the increased risk of stones that we've seen already the past few decades. He also presented data that got even more specific than just global warming, but looking at the risk of stones for people who live in cities versus rural areas, and the fact that cities are hotter than rural areas. Cities, just because of the infrastructure, the buildings, and all of the sidewalk and whatnot, tends to hold on to heat, at least from my understanding. And so that even though it's not a huge difference compared to rural areas, you do see more heat in cities, and likely that is contributing to more kidney stones in people who live in cities. And you can actually get even closer, even refine that even further to looking at areas within cities that were redlined. And if you're not familiar with redlining, this is a racist practice that the government did decades ago that basically said that there are certain areas where we shouldn't invest money to people who are working on building, say, housing and things to make communities better. And these areas, of course, tended to be areas where people of color lived. And it's really sad to think that these racist practices that happened decades ago still are impacting our cities. Most cities, especially Chicago. Chicago tends to be one of the most segregated cities, although all cities experience this. And unfortunately, the areas where more people of color live tend to be less advantage. There tends to be less stores, less opportunities, less green space. Air quality tends to be worse. And so all of these things really, these redlining practices really have a dramatic impact on how our cities and communities look even today. And when we think about this from this heat kidney stone standpoint, Dr. Goldfarb found that those areas, even within a specific city, those areas that were redlined years ago are hotter. And so perhaps, I mentioned earlier that there were previous talks that found that people who have a lower socioeconomic status tend to have more stones. So this is probably part of it. Obviously, there's like a zillion things that go into that, but potentially people who have a lower socioeconomic status, who live in more disadvantaged communities, have more kidney stones because they tend to be hotter, even than other areas within the exact same city, which I think is just really, really wild to think about. There were also some interesting talks about how microplastics and PFAS or PFAS might be linked to kidney stones. Microplastics and PFAS are different plastics, obviously, and also this group of chemicals that just stick around forever, essentially. And they build up in our water as well as different areas in our bodies. And potentially those are linked to kidney stones, which is really, really fascinating. And there was also a ton of talk. There was a whole section of talks on how the gut microbiome and bacteria in general impact kidney stones. This is an area that I find very fascinating, kind of the role of the gut microbiome, and even more importantly, from my standpoint as a dietitian, what we can do with food, whether it be with food or supplements or whatnot, to improve that gut microbiome to help prevent stones. I actually I've asked someone who does research in this area to be on the podcast, so hopefully he'll be able to join us soon and give us some more specific insight into this. But I think that general area of research is just absolutely fascinating. And there was also some talks about how to generally improve the care of people with stones. Like, we know that people with kidney stones are very, very unlikely to ever see a nephrologist, for example. There was data from the VA, oh gosh, don't quote me on this, but I believe that only around 5% of vets who were getting care within the VA system ever saw a nephrologist. And as you know, there's a big difference between what a urologist and a nephrologist does. So urologists are surgeons, and they are trained to get rid of kidney stones. And then nephrologists are sort of kidney experts. And nephrologists are going to be your go-to person when it comes to kidney stone prevention. Obviously, the waters get very, very murky because there's certainly urologists who are good at stone prevention. And there's lots and lots of nephrologists who don't know much about kidney stone prevention, right? So it's really, really hard to kind of really find, honestly, a true kidney stone expert when it comes to both a dietitian as well as doctors. And so that was kind of discussed a little bit, and how we might improve the care for people within the VA system specifically, but also in general for what we can do to help improve the care of stone prevention, because quite frankly, it's pretty dismal right now, which is why I do what I do. I also had the opportunity to present my research, which I was very excited about. I've wanted to for years, but I finally spent the time to collect the data from students who took my course, Kidney Stone Nutrition School. That's my online course that really walks you through your 24-hour urine test and tells you exactly which dietary changes to make to improve your urine risk factors for a truly personalized kidney stone prevention plan. So I presented my research on a poster, which was very fun. And I did find, spoiler alert, that people who took my course did have quite a few improvements in their 24-hour urine test, and overall had a much lower risk of stones as measured by that 24-hour urine test compared to before they took the course. So that was really, really cool to present data from a dietitian, because as I mentioned, most of the people there were doctors. There's only 2 non-doctors there, me and one other dietitian, to really show that that nutrition matters, that working with a dietitian matters, and even taking an online course from a kidney stone dietitian did improve urine chemistry. There's actually things that happened in urine that are going to make stones less likely for those students. So that was really, really, really exciting. It was really exciting to hear doctors, look at the data and get excited about the possibility of sending patients to me, just because, my goal is to help as many people with kidney stones, and they were just so excited to have a dietitian who knew about stones, and that this was a course that's available to everyone out there. So just fun to kind of hear doctors respond to my data and what I do as you guys know, in the online space and with my course, and now with our one-to-one dietitians, just to have that as a resource, because there really are not many out there. I also needed to comment on sort of the general vibe of the conference, if you will. So there are, like I said, there's 2 dietitians, but of the other people that were there, they are all doctors, so medical doctors that are practicing as primarily urologists or nephrologists. But there's also a lot of just researchers, right? So people who are not necessarily medical doctors, but who spend their lives, who've dedicated their entire career to research. And that's a lot of those people who are doing those really basic science research studies, right? And a lot of those studies are completely dependent on NIH funding. And as I mentioned, I'm recording this podcast on February 3rd, 2025. And as of right now, a lot of funding from the NIH has been halted by President Trump, and which really it will, especially if this continues on for a long time, because it's unclear how long this is going to go on, it is directly limiting and halting the ability of this group of people who are trying to make care better for kidney stones. They cannot do that without funding. More than half of the topics, I'm sure, that we talked about would be either the studies going on would have to be stopped or delayed or changed to be not as good. if funding didn't happen. And so it was kind of a sad vibe, if you will, just because unfortunately it feels that science like this is getting, not feels like it, I mean, it's a fact, science like this is getting harmed as a result of the current administration's actions by halting scientific funding and also halting the ability of NIH employees to review grants and go, kind of keep that process going of funding future research. And so kind of a lot of just fear and discussion around what's going to happen if this halt on funding continues. So that is a bit of a downer, but hopefully everything will be fine and there will be money for research. And other than that sad vibe, I think overall I'm feeling really, really excited about the future of stone research. It is such an amazing group of people. Like I said, the kidney stone research community is surprisingly small, and everyone essentially that is involved is a part of this R.O.C.K society. And so they're all there. And it's just, every time I go, this is the 4th time that I've attended, I just feel so honored that I get to hang out with these people. I definitely geek out a little bit because I'm like looking at name tags. I'm like, oh my gosh, these are like all the names on the papers that I cite all the time. And I just, kind of geek out a little bit. But it's just such a smart, kind, fascinating group of people to hang out with. And it makes me really, really excited about the future of stone research, that even though we're small, we're a mighty group and we are dedicated to improving the care of people with kidney stones and making kidney stones even more preventable than they are now. And also increasing, as I mentioned earlier, the access to kidney stone experts, because there are a lot of things that we can do to prevent stones now. We know that stones are preventable. Obviously, it's critical that we continue to innovate and come up with new ways to prevent stones, but most importantly, perhaps, sending out the message and educating other doctors and dietitians that there are things that you can do to prevent stones, and educating the healthcare community about what we already know, which is a lot about what we can do to prevent stones. So with that, I will close this episode. I know it was a bit different, but I just am still kind of buzzing from the R.O.C.K Society conference this year and really wanted to share my thoughts and reflections about all of the cool research that's going on in kidney stone world right now. And so I hope that you found it interesting. And as always, if you have any questions that you would like me to tackle on the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast, please do. I love doing listener question episodes. You can just head to kidneystonepodcast.com. Again, that's kidneystonepodcast.com. Record your question for a chance to get answered on the podcast. So with that, I will really close this episode and I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday. Thank you for listening to today's episode. For more help with kidney stones, check out my website, www.thekidneydietitian.org. For more personalized help from me, check out my online course, Kidney Stone Nutrition School. VIP enrollment includes help directly from me. I can't wait to see you there and help you prevent kidney stones. Have a great day.